Mistakes. It happens all the time, whether it be small and innocent or a catastrophic disaster. We all do it, oftentimes accidental. But what do you do when it occurs? Do you try to fix it? Did you have a contingency plan laid out to mitigate the damage and catch up with the desired outcome? Or do you try to cover it up? Usually when people speak of a publicly listed company, we'd assume that they would uphold the higher standards of ethics, especially since they have a lot of watchful stakeholders to look after. We'd also be wondering about the role of the external auditors. Why did it take them so long to finally catch the issues in the matter? Not to mention the presence of a former minister in the company. Surely we can assume this company is stable and safe to invest in, right? Our story starts with a young 33-year-old, Gan Bun Aun, who founded Transmile Group Berhad in 1993. At the time, Transmile was primarily focused in the provision of air freight, aircraft engineering and maintenance services. But in just a few years, Gan was able to make Transmile listed on Bursa Malaysia in 1997. Now that's a feat worth being proud of. With a mix of local and foreign investors, Transmile had a lot of watchful eyes on them from many places. Not to mention the many household names whom they call their clients, also relying on their services to carry out day-to-day activities. With such a large and healthy clientele, what could go wrong? Transmile had a steady growth from 1998 onwards through 2006. Its share price has risen substantially, going up as high as 14 ringgit in early 2007. Investors were rejoicing. Why wouldn't they? I would too if I had invested. But you wouldn't be laughing your way to the bank at the end of this story. It all started to go downhill on 14 February 2007, when their external auditors, Deloitte & Touch, alerted Transmile with concerns over the 2006 fourth quarter financial results. However, the next day, the Internal Audit Committee went ahead and sought approval from the Board of Directors to release the unaudited accounts. Failing to meet the submission deadline of the annual report, Transmile appealed for an extension but was rejected. Turns out, Deloitte & Touch refused to approve the annual reports due to the lack of supporting documents. Surprise, surprise. In response to this, the Board of Directors hired a special audit team, Morris Rowland Risk Management, to dig into the issues highlighted by Deloitte & Touch. But even then, they were being heavily monitored by Transmile Audit Committee. The special audit team only had very specific scope of auditing, only focusing on a few areas as instructed by the Internal Audit Committee. But, as the saying goes, don't fly too close to the sun, or your wings will get burned. For poor Gan, this is not a happy story. The reports from the special audit team showed that Transmile had overstated their revenues by over 500 million ringgit, all the way back in 2004. Copies of the report were sent to the Securities Commission. They uncovered fictitious invoices and payments that were not supported by payment vouchers. In some of these transactions, Gan used up to 35 million ringgit from his own personal funds and fed them into 20 different dormant firms, only for the amount to be transferred back to a subsidiary of Transmile, just to show the auditors that the company had business transactions. After taking into account all these figures, Transmile was making huge losses instead. In truth, they should have reported a loss of 67 million ringgit and 172 million ringgit in both 2005 and 2006. Obviously, the Securities Commissions weren't too pleased with this revelation and charged Gan and his now former executives, Kyudin Muhammad and Lo Chok Pin, with abetting the company in providing misleading, unaudited, consolidated reports. One might wonder, why go to such lengths to cover it all up? What fueled it all? Was it as simple as greed? Or did they really need the investors' money to sustain themselves? In early 2004, Kwok brothers Sendirian Berhad became Transmile's largest shareholder after acquiring a 28.46% stake in the company. It belongs to none other than, you guessed it, Robert Kwok, the richest man in Malaysia. And to top it off, the ex-transport minister and MCA president, Dr. Ling Leok Sik, came on board as Transmile's chairman. But what does this have anything to do with the scandal? Well, the overstated figures started out in 2004, the same time Transmile had such an eventful year. Coincidence? Perhaps. It's possible that those in higher management were under a lot of pressure that they decided to cheat. But that's not the end of it. In 2005, Transmile's net debt rose from around 40 million ringgit in 2004 to 600 million ringgit in 2005. These immense borrowings were used in the purchase of aircraft fleets. At the time, investors weren't really that worried because, as you know, in the aircraft industry, the price of aircraft asset is always assumed to be high. Unfortunately for them, in the later years, the hole that they have dug themselves into proved to be too deep to climb out of. The Transmile debacle have sent shockwaves across the investing community. As a result, the stock has dropped from its peak of roughly 14 ringgit in early May 2007 to around 8 in a matter of weeks. The market capitalization of the company has been wiped out as a result of the price reduction. So, what can you learn from all this? Obviously, cheating is bad. But beyond that, people like Gan, who are in position of power within their company, have a high set of responsibilities of which he should have carried out, such as properly monitoring his internal audit team and making sure no foul play occurs. Altering the financial reports will give a false sense of growth within the company. How can anyone make any good decisions if they were fed with inaccurate info? If Transmile's top management knew, perhaps they wouldn't have been too keen on making those large purchases so soon. Not to mention, whatever bad business practices you've been doing up to that point would keep on occurring if you didn't have the right information to begin with. An action, to have moral worth, must be done from duty. Wise words from a philosopher from a bygone era. According to Kant, the rightness or wrongness of actions does not depend on their consequences, but on whether they fulfill our duty. Kant's theory is an example of a deontological moral theory. In the case of Transmile, the directors, chairman, and executive have a moral obligation to do their duty in managing the company while adhering to the rules set out by the regulations. In the words of Aristotle, When presented with ethical dilemmas, persons who have developed virtuous habits are more likely to make the correct decision. Virtue ethics. It is the ethical theory that a person's honorable and moral character is developed through practice of being honest, brave, just, giving, and so on. Attitudes, dispositions, or character qualities that enable us to be and behave in ways that develop this potential are referred to as virtues. They allow us to live up to the ideas we've chosen. After all that we've learned today, if you were in their shoes, it would have been in everyone's best interest to ensure that your company is running fairly, even under unfavorable circumstances. Lying is no way to treat your investors. Being transparent and honest is key to the growth of a corporation. And by having a good relation with them through various other forms of performance measures, you are sure to have an upward trend in popularity. So, if you ever find yourself in an ethical dilemma within your corporation, just remember to carry out your due diligence with utmost honesty and virtue.